asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chat, believing in my own will. Rap fire, math table, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, setting ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of the Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever, and we've got another full episode tonight. We'll be talking about Ukraine and Russia. We'll also be hitting upon updates around the Freedom Convoy, and then finally, I've got a full course of pills for us as well tonight. So let's jump into it. So first of all, let's touch base on the war in Ukraine. This first article and everything I'm going to reference tonight, links in the video description down below. Again, I really want this just to be the jumping off point for you guys on your research journey. So again, links to everything we're going to discuss tonight in the video description. But this is from Glenn Greenwald, and if you're not subscribed to a Substack, I strongly encourage you to go do so. So the war in Ukraine. The outbreak of war between two or more nations is obviously one of the worst events that can happen for humanity, if not clearly the single worst. For that reason, when it happens, emotions are extremely high, nationalism and tribalism surge, the range of permissible debate radically shrinks, the political and media class unite in lockstep messaging across the political spectrum, and anyone even slightly off key or questioning of that script is hunted down and held up as a heretic and traitor, as you can see happening here. And so he essentially just has some screenshots of people very focused on their political agenda and trying to shoehorn anyone that doesn't fit within that as, you know, a thought criminal, essentially. So again, I encourage you guys to read this entire article, but I just thought that was a great introduction to get us started off on the subject matter of what's going on in Ukraine in regards to the Russian invasion. And reminder, we briefly touched upon the history of Ukraine and how we kind of ended up here on yesterday's video. So I encourage you guys to go check out that video if you want to go a bit deeper down the rabbit hole. But let's jump over to the province. So Russian warship, go fuck yourself. Kiev to honor troops killed on Snake Island. Not sure if you guys saw this circling around on social media, but definitely is one of those stories that for those of us that love a good David and Goliath story, while it doesn't end happily, at least in regards to Snake Island, it's very similar to, you know, think of things like the Alamo, right? Or the Battle of the Bulge and Nuts. But I just wanted to highlight this because, one, it is one of those stories of bravery and, you know, up for what they believe in. And if you somehow didn't hear about the story of Snake Island, the way the story goes is that the Russian Navy circled Snake Island, which is just kind of off the coast of Odessa, kind of in the middle of nowhere, really. And it was a 13-person or 13-manned naval base or army base there. And essentially, they were given the opportunity to surrender. They told the Russians to go fuck themselves. And it's reported that all 13 were killed. Now, again, is this 100% fact and true? I think it's very hard to know exactly what's the truth when we're literally in the middle of a war. So while this, you know, definitely plays up the patriotism of Ukraine, and I definitely think it's a great story for them to rally around. I'm sure with time we'll find out whether it is in fact true or not. Based upon all the sources I've seen, it seems like there's a good chance it is true, or at least the majority of the story is true. Now, in comparison, there's also the story going around of what is it? The Kiev Ghost, right? The ghost of Kiev. And so essentially the way this story was circling on the internet, it was in regard to a single fighter jet pilot who had essentially, the rumors were saying he had shot down at least 6 Russian aircrafts. Later on, there was kind of a fact check done. You guys can check this out as well. But essentially, it seems like that's probably not the case. And that, you know, the footage that was circling of the ghost of Kiev was in fact actually like doctored from a war video game. But again, it is one of those powerful symbols that, even if it's not true, I'm sure will be used as a rallying cry and will give hope and inspiration to Ukrainians who are definitely, at least right now, appearing to fight a David and Goliath sort of fight. So again, link to this tweet if you guys want to check it out. One thing that is interesting is a lot of people were getting upset that this was fact checked because they were saying, essentially, if it gives hope to the Ukrainians, we shouldn't be fact checking it, right? We should just allow them to have this this kind of beacon of light to encourage them to continue their fight. I understand the power of myth and legends and things of that nature. At the same time, if we're talking about like news reporting, I think news reporting needs to and should be focused on trying to tell the most accurate version of the truth that we're capable of having in that moment in time. So I don't think anyone's at fault, and I definitely don't think it's a bad idea to do these fact checks. Well, again, I can understand for Ukrainian nationalists and partisans and expats that you'd much rather hear that the ghost of Kiev is still factual. So again, just thought that was kind of interesting. And if you guys want to Google it, you can just Google Ghost of Kiev if you want to see more information on it. Now, this is from the Ron Paul Institute. Washington's crocodile tears over Ukraine's destruction. And I think this is really important for all of us to understand, regardless of whether, you 100% back Ukraine, whether you back Russia, whether you believe it's a very complicated ball of wax with no good guys or bad guys. It honestly doesn't matter for the point, at least, of this conversation. What I want to highlight is a lot of the administration, right? And as is stated in this article, the crocodile tears of Washington's elites, they don't I don't believe they actually care, right? I believe that this is just another action, another activity for them to accumulate more power, for them to accumulate more influence, for them to try and back up the individuals that are in their corner in their belief. And so I just wanted to highlight this one paragraph, but it really is worth reading the entire article. The bitter truth is that Washington's foreign policy establishment never actually considered Zelensky or his predecessor, Poroshenko, to be allies or partners of the United States, overflowing with a toxic mix of ignorance, arrogance, and extreme cynicism. Washington's elites have always viewed Ukraine as a tool to regime change. A Russia threat, after its post-Yeltsin recovery, would no longer take its direction from them. And I think this really is the sad state of affairs. I'd like to at least believe that there's a version of the past that could have been where we wouldn't find ourselves in this moment in time in regards to Russia invading Ukraine. But I think both Russia as well as the US or NATO or whoever you want to really paint as the Western side of this tug of war, they are using Ukraine, at least to a certain extent, as a political pawn. And it's obviously going to be Ukrainians and the country Ukraine that's going to suffer the most over the last 48 hours, as well as what goes on into the future. Now from the Mises Institute, Biden's Cuban Missile Crisis. And I think, well, again, when we're looking at historical analogies, you're never going to find a perfect metaphor, right? I think this is a pretty strong one, all things considered. And the one thing that I think is very concerning is, at least in my opinion, John Biden is no JFK. But Joe Biden's perverse legacy, if that term even applies anymore, may well be determined in the coming weeks by his handling of events in Ukraine. He can improve it by showing restraint against the relentless neoconservative course. One wonders what the results of a pure popular vote on the question of going to war with Russia over Ukraine would be versus a vote solely within the DC Beltway. And I definitely think that that is an interesting question to ponder, right? Does the average citizen actually want to send NATO troops or American or Canadian troops into Ukraine to fight for Ukrainian independence? And then this is a little long, but again, I think this is a good analogy, so I wanted to hit upon it. President John F. Kennedy faced similar pressures in his belief or in his brief years as president. Regardless of one's views on Camelot, Kennedy was a New England liberal and idealist, not a neoconservative. He sincerely abhorred the possible use of nuclear weapons in a conflict with the Soviets. He communicated clandestinely with Nikita Khrushchev to avoid just such a conflict and managed to bring the U.S. back from the brink of an ugly tank standoff in Berlin during 1961, stating to the chagrin of Cold Warriors that the Berlin Wall was a hell of a lot better than a war. Kennedy similarly resisted calls by the Pentagon, CIA, and Joint Chiefs for the U.S. to back a puppet government in Laos. He was reasonably firm in his opposition to escalations in Vietnam, denying repeated Pentagon requests for thousands of ground troops. Time and again, he imagined his re-election in 1964 would free him politically to remove America completely from Southeast Asia. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the pressure on Kennedy to use nuclear missiles against that tiny, impoverished country was intense. Secretary of State Dean Rusk, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, and CIA Deputy Richard Helms, the Joint Chiefs, and one why is that covered up on me? And one particularly bloodthirsty general named Curtis bombs away LeMay, all pressed hard for action. They considered JFK's Cuban blockade disastrously weak. One CIA operative called his failure to launch a nuclear strike treasonous. LeMay compared it to appeasement in Munich. And of course, his own vice president, Lyndon Johnson, was never an ally when it counted. Kennedy's only firm and trusted confidant throughout all of it was his own brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Like Trump, JFK almost mutinous, like Trump, JFK faced almost mutinous attacks and subterfuge from within by his own cabinet, administration agencies, military commanders, and especially the CIA. I think it's really important us to remember that the United States of America and just Western governments in general have been operating within this industrial military complex for an extended period of time. There's a lot of vested interest. And while I doubt that any of those vested interests want to see a full-blown nuclear war, I wouldn't put it past them to want to take it right up to the brink of that, right up until the edge, because it's good for profits. And particularly if you're the one supplying those munitions. Now, from Rebel News, breaking: NATO activates response force for first time ever due to Russian invasion of Ukraine. The force has not yet been deployed, but has been put on standby. It is unclear at the time how many troops the force will contain. Now, from Toronto Sun, Canada plans to match individual donations to Red Cross for Ukraine dollar for dollar. And I guess I'm bringing this up for two reasons. One, if you guys want to donate, this is a way that you can get your donations to be matched. But on the other hand, I think it's, I guess, just talking in the abstractions here, if I'm looking at this in a non-political manner, it's kind of weird to have the government say that they're going to match dollar for dollar taxpayer donations with taxpayer dollars. Ottawa, the federal government is planning to match donations individuals make to Canadian Red Cross to help bring humanitarian relief to Ukraine as invading Russian forces close in on the country's capital. The campaign, which is slated to begin Friday and run until March 18th, would see the government match donations by Canadians dollar for dollar to a maximum of $10 million, said a senior government official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss matters not yet public. So again, if you guys want to read the entire article, link in the video description down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. In this specific situation, are you guys good with essentially Canadian taxpayer funds being used to match Red Cross donations? In a more abstract manner, are you good with that sort of policy in general when it comes to the government's use of funds? Again, love to hear your thoughts and opinions in that comment section. Now from the Toronto Sun again, Europe's energy fears knock SWIFT off Russia's sanctions list. And so it will be interesting to see how this all plays out. I don't know. I think obviously this is a very complicated geopolitical situation. I can't help but feel like if Russia was to be kicked out of SWIFT, if Russia was to essentially be barred from most Western banks and banking institutions and capabilities, I'm not sure that on a long-term trajectory that's actually going to lead to a net positive result for the West. And one of the reasons I think of that is I believe Russia and China would still find ways to settle without SWIFT in regards to Russia's, plethora of oil, gas, and other natural minerals that China could use, right? And I think China could easily absorb a lot of the production Russia currently produces if the West was to actually completely lock them out. Now, again, because of the energy dependence in particular of Europe, but even to a lesser extent here in Canada and the United States, we actually do import a decent chunk of Russian oil as well. I don't think that it's as simple as a lot of people want to make it sound when they're saying just sanction Russia into oblivion. But again, love to hear your thoughts. I don't have an answer to this situation. I think my answer is a non-answer to a lot of this, which is I wish we would have never found ourselves in this position in the first place. And I can't help but think that it could have been avoided, at least to a certain extent. But that would have been, decades ago. We would have had to make smarter decisions and been thinking more long-term then. From the National Post, Ukraine updates day 2, an exodus of women and children, but for the men, it is forbidden. European nations are debating whether to deploy the financial nuclear weapon, cutting Russia from SWIFT. So why they're highlighting here forbidden for men, essentially Ukraine has implemented conscription. If I remember correctly, I think any male of fighting capacity between age 18 and 60 is required to stay within the country to defend Ukraine. So I guess before moving on from this, again, very complicated situation, very dynamic as well. I imagine we're going to see a lot of updates and evolution of the situation over this weekend. Even if you don't give a shit about Ukraine or about Russia or, Eastern Europe or Asia in general, there still is going to be cascading effects and impacts in Canada. So again, the financial markets, commodity markets, just general, like if we saw a hot war break out between NATO and Russia, obviously that would impact us in Canada as well. And we're going to touch upon some of the other impacts later on in some of the other pill stories we got for today. So let's get into the first blue pill story of the day. So this is from Blacklock's reporter, calls convoy cash harmless. I think this is important to highlight because, or actually, this isn't even a blue pill story. This is just my trucker convoy update. Sorry, guys. But calls convoy cash harmless. Millions in donations to the Freedom Convoy appeared to be honest outpouring of public support, a federal regulator said yesterday. It wasn't cash that funded terrorism, the Commons Finance Committee was told. It was their own money, testified Barry McKillop, Deputy Director of the Financial Transactions and Reports Analyst Center. It wasn't cash that funded terrorism or was in any way money laundering. Deputy Director McKillop yesterday told the Commons Finance Committee he did not consider the crowdfunding suspicious. These were people who supported the cause before it was declared illegal, he said. There were people around the world who were fed up with COVID and were upset and saw the demonstration, said McKillop. I believe they just wanted to support the cause. That's definitely my take on it. I feel like Occam's razor kind of dictated this throughout. I know the CBC in particular and some liberal MPs were pushing hard on, this was Russia. I know that others were trying to say this was Trumpism, kind of hijacking Canadian politics and Canadian society. I honestly, personally, just think a lot of Canadians are actually fed up with fucking mandates, and I don't blame them. I would count myself amongst them as well. But again, if you guys want to check out this entire article from Blacklocks, I encourage you to do so. Again, encourage you guys to support them with a subscription. Now from Toronto Star, Freedom Convoy organizer Pat King denied bail. Honestly, before the Freedom Convoy even became a thing, never heard of Pat King, didn't know much about him. I haven't paid a lot of attention to him. He definitely seems like probably one of the bigger stains, I guess, on the Freedom Convoy would be a decent way to frame it. He's definitely been very outspoken and said things that are politically incorrect, and some of them that just seem wrong. But again, I haven't dived deep into his back catalog. Mainly, my exposure to him has honestly been through the mainstream media's coverage of him. One thing that did stand out during this that really put me off of him was I saw he kind of launched what looked like a shit token during the Freedom Convoy to raise money for it. Now, again, he may have had the best intentions in that regards, but we've got Bitcoin. You don't need to launch like I forget what it was, but like a Freedom Trucker Convoy token or whatever the case may be. And I wouldn't be surprised that they probably put together in such a rush that it could have easily been offside in regards to the way that money was raised as well. But anyways, the article just kind of highlights he was denied bail. We saw that Litch earlier in the week, she as well was denied bail. And one of the other people pegged as a leader in the convoy, he was released on, I believe it was $100,000 or $105,000 in bail. So if you guys want to dive further into Pat King's exact situation, I encourage you to do so. Link to the Toronto Star article in the video description down below. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on Pat King. Like I said, I haven't dived deep, but the little bit I did, again, he's definitely, he doesn't speak for me. But I personally think that the same way that the mainstream media tried to make out that like this was Russia's doing or Trumpism or anything else like this, I think that regardless of who the founders were, this grew into a much bigger grassroots movement, right? Like for me, the people that I think of more so in regards to the Freedom Convoy that didn't necessarily have the same sort of like leadership or public facing role would be guys like Brian Peckford, right? The only living signatory on the rights and charters of freedom here in Canada. Like Aviva Fry, who was down there for more than 50% of the time doing live streams and kind of covering what was going on day to day in Ottawa, even to a lesser extent, like Jordan Peterson, who's just kind of a thought leader here in Canada that was speaking out on behalf of the anti-mandate perspective. But again, love to hear your thoughts and opinions. And certainly, I think that the Freedom Convoy, I don't know how integral Pat King was, but I imagine from the mainstream media's perspective and your average person on the ground, they probably would have viewed it with a slightly more generous light if Pat King wasn't involved. Now from CTV News, what ramifications will Russia's attack on Ukraine have in Canada? And so this brings us into our first blue pill story of the day. So if you kind of want a quick breakdown on some of the major things that we need to be aware of here in Canada, I think this is a good introduction. So talking about things like refugees, supply chain issues, global stocks, and the volatility that's likely going to stay in those markets until we really have any certainty. Increase on oil and gas prices, which we've already seen to a certain extent, and we're hearing rumors that we could see it go as high as $2 a liter for gas in Canada. We covered that in one of yesterday's stories. Potential cyber attacks as well are definitely top of mind when thinking about how things could play out here, because both we've had Russia in the past enact a certain cyber attacks, but we've also had Joe Biden saying that they're considering any and all measures, including cyber attacks on Russia. And one of the things that's interesting is, as compared to World War II, something like cyber attacks weren't a thing, right? Even compared to pretty much any of the other wars that we've seen America involved in, hot wars, cyber attacks just weren't a thing because either it was asymmetrical, right, in regards to access to technology and reliance on technology from parties, right? Think of like the Taliban in Afghanistan and the United States military. There just wasn't the same sort of risk there. But if we did see US and Russia go toe to toe in a cyber war, both parties have built up some pretty powerful infiltration, I would imagine. Now from this is from the CAPP. I just want to kind of highlight here because I found that a lot of Canadians didn't realize this, but Canada actually does import a decent chunk of oil from Russia, particularly to service Eastern Canada. And so in 2019, that was roughly 17,000 barrels, and that works out to about $550 million. So again, not an immaterial dollar amount. Now, compared to what we import from, America, right, at 490,000 barrels and almost $14 billion. It's definitely not the lion's share, but it is the third largest importer of oil to Canada. So certainly something to be aware of, and it would have real impacts here in Canada. Now, one of the things that you'll see a lot of pundits that are anti-war in Ukraine and don't want to see NATO dragged into it bring up is, why aren't we cutting off the oil, right? Oftentimes you'll hear that Russia is a petro economy driven. A lot of their state revenue, right, is driven by petro products, and they're essentially servicing both North America and to a greater extent Europe. So it will be interesting to see. That is something that in theory down the road we potentially could see NATO allies do, but I think it's something that they're going to begrudgingly do, particularly in the middle of winter when supply chains are already kind of taxed out. I think that would likely end up being one of their last measures. Now from the Canadian Press, public health mandates could return, Tam warns, but favors lighter touch in future. If it wasn't so important, I would literally just stop covering COVID and restrictions and mandates here in Canada, but I can't help but feel like the mainstream media, politicians, and the administration and health experts, they're not going to give up on this still. And it's wild because we're seeing, the UK has literally gone back to normal. I was chatting with a gentleman in the UK yesterday on a Zoom call, and he was saying that his understanding is you're even allowed to go into work now if you've got symptoms of COVID. Like, they're just literally treating it like the flu is the way he framed it for me. Again, that's anecdotal, but I don't know why he'd be lying to me about that on the Zoom call. But let's read some of the quotes here. So, Ottawa, Canadian government should be ready to resume public health measures if another serious variant of COVID-19 emerges, even as they scale back mandates for mask and vaccines, the country chief public health officer said Friday. My biggest question here is, can we start to actually put metrics in place, at least so we can understand your logical framework, right? What is defined as a serious variant? What sorts of thresholds would we have to hit, right? In pretty much every other aspect of society, we actually have not just qualitative, but quantitative measures that we can actually point to understand why we did certain things. Where right now, over the last 2 years, our entire response to COVID-19 and the pandemic has appeared to just be based upon pollsters and worst case scenario projections from health officials, or at least that's my read on the situation. Weekly case counts are down by 26% nationally, Tam said, and the number of people with COVID-19 in hospitals and intensive care units has declined by more than 20% since last week. There are still 6,228 new cases in Canada as of February 24th, and that figure is an underestimate since many jurisdictions have restricted molecular tests to people at high risk. So again, if you guys want to read the entire article and try and get into the brain of Tam, feel free to, although I think you're going to end up just as confused as I am. Now, this is from the Globe and Mail, and I don't really even have a hot take on this. I just always find these sort of articles interesting because it kind of lets you know who the mainstream media kind of looks towards as thought leaders. So this is Meet 50 Emerging Leaders Reinventing How Canada Does Business. So if you guys are interested in this listicle, I encourage you to check it out. Now let's get into our first red pill story of the day. I'm actually surprised. This sounds mildly familiar, but I feel like somehow during the Trucker Freedom Convoy protest, I completely overlooked it. So I'd love to hear, did you guys hear about Laurentian University essentially becoming insolvent? And so this is from CBC News. Laurentian University shifts tone and will release 3 million documents to Ontario, MPP says. So the school declared insolvency on February 1st, 2021, and applied for protection under the Company's Creditor Arrangement Act, CCAA, which has allowed it to operate while dealing with its financial problems. Actually, I just realized when I originally read this, I forgot what year we were in, and that this happened over a year ago now. So as I'm reading out to you guys, I realized okay, yeah, I probably just missed it in the general shuffle of COVID craziness a year ago. But again, love to hear. Do you guys remember this originally breaking news? And it's interesting that it's taken a year for us essentially to get them to agree to release documents. In December, 11 members of the board resigned, including Chair Claude Lacroix, a prominent lawyer in Sudbury. And essentially, there's just a few other details in the article. I encourage you guys to check it out if you're interested. But it just seems strange that an organization like this would become insolvent overnight, unless there was a major donor that somehow decayed them, right? Pulled back funding or refused to meet the obligations that they'd originally made. So again, interesting to see how this plays out. Interesting that 11 board members resigned in December as well. And hopefully we'll eventually someday understand what the hell happened at Laurentian University. They've also had major layoffs during all of this. And again, that's covered in the video description down below. Now, this is from Blacklock's reporter. CMHC tracks second mortgages. And so any real estate investors' ears are going to perk up on this. CMHC compiled records on millions of mortgage holders to identify Canadians who owned more than one property, according to Access to Information records. The massive data scoop included details on loans and credit scores for homeowners who were never CMHC customers. CMHC will be collecting personal information, client identification, income and credit bureau scores for non-administrative use, staff wrote in one 2018 memo. Whenever possible, CMHC would collect the information in a way that would not allow the identification of any individual. Files disclosed by Blacklock's last October 20th showed Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation had compiled a database on 8,951,000 property owners, including credit scores on 6,750,000 Canadians. Most were not CMHC customers. So one thing that I think is important here is CMHC is gathering a ton of data about things that don't even directly relate to CMHC. The agency at the time said the data scoop was to gain better insights into the evolving mortgage landscape. However, in a newly disclosed internal email, CMHC explained the true purpose was to identify Canadians who own more than one mortgage property. And so I think this is important to understand because I'm just so done with government officials telling us that they're doing one thing for one reason and then eventually it being leaked and turns out that actually they had different motivations or additional motivations than what they were originally willing to tell the public. So here's the email here. I encourage you guys to read the whole thing, but I'm just going to hit one point. Purposes of identifying if a borrower has more than one uninsured loan product with the same issuer. So the reason this matters is, for a long time, we've heard from politicians in the administration, they've got no interest in taxing people's principal residences. However, they've, spent $250,000 on a study to essentially figure out how much equity was in principal residences and how much money the government would make if they were to tax it. And that came out within the last year. And again, this just feels like if they don't have a good enough reason to tell us to our face for collecting this data, I don't think they should get the data. doesn't seem that complex in my opinion. But again, love to hear your thoughts and opinions in that chat. Now, another red pill story here. This is from the Western Standard, and this one's just kind of strange to me and shows, in my opinion, oversensitivity. But again, love to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. Residential school slip up leads to TV station censor. So essentially, this is related to a TV broadcast out of Kitchener. So a co-host added the first time this vandalism, and they're referring to vandalism in regards to a statue of Queen Elizabeth. The first time this vandalism happened was back on Canada Day. This was when many Canadians were reckoning with the country's colonial past following the discovery of hundreds of unmarked graves at a former residential camps. And so that's the slip up they're talking about here. Honestly, I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to the reporter. They probably meant to say residential schools and just said camps by accident. Now, the whole story here stems from one individual complaint, and that individual complained that essentially the mainstream media and this reporter were trying to downplay the severity of the situation by calling it camps. And they were arguing that, that draws an analogy towards like summer camps. Which again, I think a counter argument here that they also bring up in the article is like, actually, when you talk about like finding unmarked graves and use the word camps, I actually more think of concentration camps, which seems like actually a more extreme analogy than the word school, right? And that's literally the debate here is they use the word camps instead of school. And so because of all this, essentially the Canadian Association of Broadcasters decided based upon their code of ethics that they rejected the explanation from the TV station that the new director and what the news director said that the camps reference was a simple error. The panel believes that given the many historical wrongdoings related to residential schools, it was imperative that the proper term be used. Now, again, should he probably have used the word schools instead of camps? 100%. Is this worth even having an investigation over, though, right? And actually condemning the individual news broadcaster and the TV station? I don't know. It just seems like a overreaction. I'd much rather see the time and energy go into actually finding the details around these stories, right? We've heard of tons of potential unmarked graves being discovered, and yet we haven't heard of any deep investigations or explorations to get to the bottom of how these things happened, whether anyone still alive should be held accountable for those actions or, anything like that. It seems like what we see is just a lot of political grandstanding, right? Use it for a photo op, use it for a marketing campaign, use it to get a random TV broadcaster in trouble, but don't actually really try and get to the bottom of it. But again, that's my take. Love to hear your thoughts and opinions. Now, this is from the Epic Times. So CDC drastically alters key measures that influence mask mandates across the U.S. I encourage you guys to read the entire article. It definitely seems like the CDC is just trying to slowly exit stage left when it comes to COVID mandates, rules, regulations, restrictions, and all that. And they're just hoping, I think, that collateral damage or they don't receive any flack in regards to winding this whole thing down. But essentially now they're saying that the majority of adults that are in counties or areas that have a low risk of high transmission right now, as in they're not going through a severe outbreak in this moment, they probably don't need to wear masks anymore. But again, even the language that's used still feels wishy-washy and like they're leaving themselves an out, in my opinion. But I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions in that comment section. Now let's jump over to True North. Taxpayer watchdog launches petition to defund CBC and end media funding. This is something we've covered a few times. I'm 100% on board with this. We're over $1 trillion in debt. Why do we need to be giving the CBC over $1 billion every year? The Canadian Taxpayers Federation has launched a petition calling on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to scrap the more than $1 billion in funding per year for the CBC and to stop giving $600 million of taxpayer money to other media outlets. We launched this petition because Canadians should decide which news outlets they prefer and to support them financially if they choose to do so, said CTF-BC Director Chris Sims in a statement emailed to True North on Thursday. They should not be forced to pay for it through the government. Yep, 100% agree, particularly when that mainstream media seems to want to at least demonize a certain chunk of the population. We are more than $1 trillion in debt, she said. We cannot afford to be handing more than $1 billion to the CBC every year and doling out $600 million in taxpayer money to other media outlets. And actually, last time CBC actually received $1.4 billion last year, right? So again, and over $400 million to other broadcasters. So we're coming up on almost $2 billion a year that we're doling out to what essentially is the equivalent of state-sponsored media here in Canada. And it's really hard, like, just step back from all politics and personal opinions here. If someone's giving you your industry $2 billion, if a government is giving your industry $2 billion a year, are you truly going to be able to be impartial when it comes to covering that government, right? Those politicians? I don't think so. And in fact, let's say that there was a party like the PPC with Max that want to actually cancel and defund the CBC and these media funding programs. Are you really going to be completely dispassionate and unbiased when you cover those individuals? No, it's a huge conflict of interest. And honestly, like, they should almost have to disclose that on every single news story they do. Hey, just a reminder, despite the fact that we're covering the Canadian government here, they actually pay the vast majority of our salaries. And it should be concerning. We should want truth, transparency, and authenticity from our media news outlets here in Canada. Now from Timcast, polling firm tells Democrats to declare COVID-19 win ahead of midterm elections. The advice comes as new studies indicate Americans no longer regard the pandemic as a crisis. Yep, I would say that makes a lot of sense. And at the same time, I think this just highlights how this is all just about political grandstanding, right? This is all just about accumulating power, trying to speak to your voter base. And as we go into the midterm elections, I think we will see a lot of Democrats abandon the COVID restrictions and the COVID pandemic narrative, because I just don't think the average American voter is going to want to vote 2 more years of lockdowns. At least, God, I hope they don't, because I hope that Canada will essentially be forced to follow suit if we see literally everyone in America free. Surely our Canadian politicians will realize, well, fuck, we're either going to cause another insurrection, or we can actually just give back people the freedoms we stole from them, or at least try to trick them into thinking that we'd stolen from them. Now let's move on to our black pill story of the day. This is from Spencer Fernando's blog. Encourage you guys to check it out. Naive green energy policies have severely weakened the Western world. And there's a big discussion to have here, but understand that when we see things like the Keystone Pipeline being canceled, which I believe delivers or could have delivered over 800,000 barrels of oil to America, and America is currently, I believe, importing 500,000 barrels of oil from Russia. Well, actually, you know what? It probably would have been better off to have that Keystone Pipeline and not be dependent upon Russia, who essentially now appears to be one of your foreign enemies for America and NATO. And when we're looking at what went down even in Germany, right? In Germany, they essentially have been shutting down their coal-fired power plants. They've been not renewing their nuclear power plants either. And so that's left them extremely dependent upon Russia. Now, I'm not going to say that this was all on purpose, but I don't think you could have set yourself up in a worse position as the German or American government if you had tried, right? Like, if you had tried to set yourself up to be more dependent on Russia, I'm not sure you would actually accomplish it. I think they did a bang-up job in that regard to making sure that they couldn't actually go too ham on Russia with sanctions. And just want to highlight a couple of key points from this article. The share of Germany's energy that is provided by coal has shrunk from around 45 in 2013 to 24% in 2020. At the same time, Germany was shutting down their nuclear power plants. This is probably the point where you're thinking, that sounds like a bad idea. And you are 100% right, considering that most reality-minded analysts understand that nuclear energy is essential to any so-called green energy future. To simultaneously shrink the coal industry and shut down nuclear power plants means there is a huge energy gap. How did Germany fill that gap? By becoming dependent on Russia. And again, like we talked about yesterday, it's a very complex situation, Ukraine and Russia. But understand a big aspect of one of Russia's frustrations right now with NATO and the Ukraine was trying to build new pipelines through Ukraine and the costs associated with getting permission to build those pipelines. So again, the demand that Russia receives from Europe and all the funds Russia receives from Europe incentivizes them to want to be able to have as many pipelines feeding Europe as possible. And it definitely has created at least one of the conflicts that are driving what's going on right now in Ukraine. Now from switching into actually, sorry, this is another black pill. Got the wrong label there. this one's from Louder with Crowder, and I just want to highlight, if you guys aren't paying attention to Russell Brand and his broadcasts, I think he does a great job in a very short period of time, exploring different ideas and concepts. And one of the things he explores in a recent video was Russell Brand explains that Justin Trudeau just damaged Canada forever. And I'll encourage you guys to watch the whole video, but I think one of the things we need to understand here in Canada is that the Overton window right now, right? That idea of like what's socially acceptable has been dramatically shift during the last few months here in Canada. And so literally what we've seen now is both politicians and the mainstream media essentially get comfortable with just, demonizing a portion of the Canadian population while also gaslighting them whenever the opportunity is presented. We've seen the desire to essentially create an emergent, to define the situation in Ottawa as such a severe emergency that we had to literally enact a law, or the Emergencies Act, which had never been used before in Canada. And then before it can even pass Senate, we decide, not that big of a deal. Let's move on. And literally within a 3-hour time span, right? Like at 1 p.m., you've got Liberal senators saying what an existential threat these anarchist occupiers are in Ottawa. And then 3 hours later, Justin Trudeau's like, yeah, I'm bored with this toy. Let's move on to the next thing. And again, regardless of how we kind of look back on this with hindsight, understand that things have shifted. And now the next time there's an emergency, it's going to be far easier for governments to justify it, right? Well, look at that completely peaceful protest or occupation in Ottawa. Well, if you've got anything slightly more violent or more severe than that, there's a very easy justification that that's an equal or greater emergency and thus justifies the Emergencies Act. If you guys have been paying attention to what's going on in Russia right now, it appears that there's been massive protests in Russia, and we've seen a huge crackdown by the Russian state, right? Arresting hundreds, if not thousands, of demonstrators. And again, this is all a bad precedent. And I understand that, some people are using this right now to try and score political points and things of that nature. Fuck that shit. Literally, what society do we want to live in Canada, right? I don't want to live in a society where we just jump from emergency to emergency. I actually want us to approach things in a rational, logical, thoughtful manner, at least ideally, right? Can a person dream? This is from the Rebel News. Enviro hippies want car advertising banned like tobacco. A British Columbia-based environmental NGO tweeted in support of the scheme. So this is fascinating, essentially saying that car commercials are as evil as tobacco commercials were back in the day. Now, the original argument stems from essentially this sponsored article from the BBC, Time in Nature and Healing, and the Lexus NX can help get you there. So again, it's very obvious that this is just trying to sell cars, right? Or at least highlight the Lexus vehicle here. However, at the same time, I don't know if you want to jump to conclusions and literally say we should just ban all car commercials because cars are bad for the environment, bro. This feels very similar to that idea of getting rid of nuclear energy while also trying to go green from an energy standpoint. You need to still be able to travel somehow. So what's your solution there, right? And understand that car companies spend a ton of money on advertising. They're going to find different outlets for those advertising dollars to still attract attention. And just unnecessary government regulation is never the answer to any of our problems. But again, link to the video description down below if you guys want to check that out. And let's jump into our white pill story of the day. So what I want to highlight here for you guys is just an amazing YouTube video that I encourage you to check out. Link in the video description down below. But essentially, it's this gentleman who's built this, remote citadel, his version of the Citadel, his remote cabin in the woods. But cabin doesn't really do it justice, right? Look at that beauty. But over 50 years, he's essentially been building out his property here, doing permaculture and things of that nature as well. Really fascinating. And I always find this one motivating. So I thought I'd just give you a nice little motivating YouTube video as you head into the weekend. And then finally want to hit upon a couple memes or just kind of jokes of the day. The first one's not really a meme, but it's almost as good. This is from Jesse Kelly. Just poured myself a white Russian, then dumped it in the sink. Don't call me a hero, just doing my part. We're all in this together. And one of the commenters also responded, doing my part, and he took his Russian dressing, crossed out Russian, and highlighted the word, or wrote the word freedom. And while this seems like crazy parody, and in these two cases it is, the number of people I actually saw like doing silly things like this that really aren't going to amount to anything, but essentially just seems like virtue signaling to the rest of your peer group in regards to like, look how much I support Ukraine, seems very bizarre in my mind. And again, even like the smaller things we've seen, like the LCBO announcing they're not going to sell Russian vodka or whatever. I mean, like realistically, I don't drink it, so it's more of a shrug to me. But I don't think any of these small little measures is going to amount to anything, right? And I'm not saying you should, but like, are you willing to ban oil imports? That's actually, if you want to really try and hit Russia where it hurts, it's probably going to hit them a lot harder. But again, we'll see how that all plays out over the coming days and weeks. And then we've got this meme. Not sure if you guys heard about it, but essentially the Taliban in Afghanistan came out saying that they want Russia and Ukraine to end the crisis through peaceful means. And this is just a photo of Jack Sparrow on all sides of the political equation looking confused. Because if that makes sense to you, you're following a different plot than I am, I guess. But that's it for today's Friday episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, hit that like button, hit subscribe if you're new to the channel. Appreciate when you guys, show me that sort of support, and really appreciate when you guys share these videos on social media as well, because big tech's going to do us really no favors in regards to promoting this show. Not that they should, but they're definitely not going to. And if you guys want to make sure you never miss an episode, make sure you hit that notification bell on YouTube, because oftentimes notifications aren't coming through. I've heard from a few of you. And finally, if you hate watching this on Big Tech, I don't blame you. Reminder, I'm always uploading the replays on BitChute and Rumble, so you can find that Matt McKeever Unfiltered on both those channels. But before we wrap up tonight, let's jump into the chat and see what you guys had to say. So we've got Peter in the chat. Hey, what's up? 35 episodes in and watched almost every single one live yet. I still don't get notified by YouTube. Yeah, it is what it is, right, with the algorithm. But it is crazy to think that we're 35 episodes deep into this. We've got Graham in the chat. We've got Quentin. Hey, what's up, Quentin? Basmatic, the politics around Ukraine are exactly the same tactics as used in Canada. Use the word Nazi, claim racism, etc. Yeah, I do think that the Russian situation is even more complex than anything that we experienced here in Canada. But certainly there's an immediate desire to demonize the other side. Peter says, quick, pull all the Russian booze from LCBOs. That will make Putin change his mind. If anything, isn't that just going to leave Russia with more alcohol? And won't they just be able to drink themselves into, crazy self-confidence like a lot of young gentlemen do when they first discover alcohol in bars? NFT Viking says, hey, crew. Hey, what's up, Danny? Peter, you don't even have idea how many alcohol brands are in hands of Russian oligarchs. That quite possibly could be. But I guess, are they actually banning everything? Because all I saw was Russian vodka. Half shelves in LCBO would have to be emptied. Well, they did announce that they're going to be banning Russian vodka. But I don't know if that was all alcohol products or just vodka. Although now that I'm saying it out loud, that'd be strange if it was just vodka. That would almost seem like a stereotypical response, right? Like, wouldn't that almost be like prejudice or racist? Donna Jean says no. Peter says, I'm not donating to shit after they doxed everyone for donating to the convoy. Yeah, that's actually probably a good point too. If Russia wins and you donate to the Red Cross, are you going to get leaked? And will you also be considered a thought criminal? Crowdfunding is dead. Cancer funding could get spent on the unvaxxed. Cancer funding. Pat King has done lots of damage to Freedom Convoy. Tamara should be freed. Yeah, I think overall that's probably a similar take to mine. Again, I just haven't looked much into Pat King, but the stuff I have seen, he definitely doesn't speak for me. Craig says, Tam doesn't even have a brain. The COVID numbers are bogus. They have made shit up since day one. I would be curious how many flu cases there are. Just amazing that there is not one one flu case. We are dealing with shitheads here. It's hard to know. What do we chalk up to incompetence? What do we chalk up to malice? What do we chalk up to, like, I've gone too far and now I'm just going to keep on going, right? And there's that idea that it's much easier to get people to swallow a big lie than a small lie. So again, definitely some of my thoughts. Leah says, I thought a bunch of Ukraine's oil plants or pipes owned by Biden's kids. So yes, Hunter Biden was an exec on a board of directors, if I'm not mistaken, for a large Ukrainian oil company or pipeline company, I guess I should say. And certainly when you dig deeper, there seems to be a lot of shenanigans there, but you can almost get canceled on YouTube if you bring them up too much. So I'll leave you guys to go down your own rabbit holes, but absolutely you should look into it. However, there is a meme circulating right now that's not really that true, where it shows Biden, Pelosi, Mitt Romney, and is it Kerry is the other one, and it claims that all of them have children that work for or on boards of Ukrainian gas companies or pipeline companies. That's technically not true, at least to the best of my understanding. I think that it's only the Bidens that have done that. Although each one of those other people that we mentioned, they do have kids in powerful positions that it's difficult to not think that their parents' privilege likely got them those cushy jobs. Similar to what we saw with a previous finance minister here in Canada when his daughter was hired right out of the gate by We Charity. And then he eventually stepped down during that We Charity scandal. Terry says, love your comment about fair media. This is definitely a big influence on viewers' thoughts. I should know I'm fairly new to other forms of news, Rebel News, Viva Fry, and of course, the Maple Pill. Appreciate it, Terry, and glad to have you with us. Leah says, I could be wrong, but Yassi bro, nuclear here, Germany, worst move ever on so many levels. Are you saying nuclear energy is the worst idea ever in Germany? Because I guess like my biggest counter argument to that is like, if you're going to go green, how else are you going to produce it? Because I don't think that solar and wind is actually going to solve your problems in Germany. Jennifer says Trudeau is part of the WEF, and so this is part of their mandates to cause division with citizens. And next WEF is pushing the digital pass. Now, almost time to head to the bush. Well, we're already here in the bush, at least at the Citadel, so we're one step ahead of most. Definitely, we need to fight tooth and nail against digital IDs, in my opinion, particularly if they try and make them like a global ID, right? I definitely don't want to see any of that. I'm not happy that they're trying to make me update my health card to include a photo. What's wrong with the white and red one? You're going to have to show me a lot of data before you talk me into it. Although I think that by this August now, I have to do that if I want to keep my health care here in Ontario. Yes, he says a Green New Deal, all electric cars 2030, minimum 16 new reactors by 2030. It would take all approvals and all shovels in the ground 4 years ago. I don't know all the details there, but yeah, this pushing of trying to make all vehicles like electric based by 2030 or 2035, depending upon which country you're in, seems very naive at best case scenario, right? If we're giving you a giant benefit of the doubt, it seems like, again, this is just hitting us towards a cliff. And I'll leave it up to you guys to throw out conspiracy theories or nefarious motivations to why they'd want to do that. But it doesn't seem like a net benefit for any of us. Backwood says, love the beard, appreciate it, and appreciate all of you guys that were jumping in the chat tonight and hanging out with me. I know you've got a lot of things competing for your time and attention, so the fact that you would spend it with me on the Maple Pill means a lot. Again, if you don't mind hitting that like and subscribe button, much appreciated. Otherwise, we'll be back on Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, same place. Appreciate you guys. Hopefully the world doesn't fall apart between now and then. Yeah, I'll see you Monday. And we'll play out on our intro.
Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Web fire, math, table scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my